Welcome to the Oldest Study. My guest today is Mr. Beam, my English teacher, and then probably my
future Greek teacher.
Future
Ancient.
Ancient Greek teacher. All right, perfect. I'm excited.
Me too.
Yeah. So have some questions for you about, of course, the classics, your journey with the classics. And so just to kind of get that started then is, how did your journey with the classics begin and start?
Yeah, when was I indoctrinated? I think the first thing that was classical that I ever consumed was this really bright book that you must have come across called D'Aulaire's Book of Greek Myths. Sort of an oversized image, I think, of the sun god, like of Helios crossing the horizon. And a lot of kids in the 90s, I think, were introduced to it, and the aughts as well. And it just took you through abbreviated versions of a lot of myths, and I thought those were so cool back in third grade. And then things got serious, since we both went to the same high school, when you were forced to learn Latin, and then voluntarily taking Greek really steeps you in it even further. So that was the point of no return. But I think the first remotely classical thing I ever did was read D'Aulaire's Book of Greek Myths. If you haven't read it, well, I guess you kind of missed the boat on it. You've gotten more advanced now.
There's I feel like there is a kind of, maybe that was more of your generation's kind of like classical, like
you're the Percy Jackson crowd, aren't you?
I guess we are. I've never been the biggest fan of Percy Jackson. I know a lot of my peers are, but it just never, I can never like sit down and read it. And then I don't know, I think now with also knowing kind of a lot of these myths and seeing how it's just like reflected in the book, it's just kind of like all jumbled, so it's not as like, I don't know. For me, I wanted to know what it was exactly going on in the myth, I guess.
Well, you get multiple versions of it too, depending on who you're consulting. So
that's also true, yeah.
That's actually fun, I think, to realize as you go along. You're like, oh, this is not the authoritative version. It wasn't just one person writing it down. And that is Aphrodite.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely across classical texts, there's we were even talking about it in Latin class today, but how certain authors will like kind of pick up from where the other one left off, or there'll be different descriptions, and then you kind of get into some ambiguity there. But no, I think what really caught me from a young age, though, like the certain books, was or my generation's like kind of version of yours, was the Olympian series. I think it was like Greg O'Connor, I think it's by him. It's like a illustrated, like it's like a graphic novel of like different, of all of like the Olympians and like famous stories that they had. And of course that was like really enthralling, especially back in like fourth grade, when of course love still like the pictures and like in a graphic novel or cartoon, and then it all kind of mended that love for classics.
I'm still a sucker for a good picture book. I mean, when we were going over the Odyssey together, I went to the library and picked up the graphic novel version of it, which you should check out. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's just very well illustrated, and there are things that they do in those images that we spend a lot of time, talking about how you might interpret the text, but by choosing to portray certain things in the way that they do, they're making very strong interpretations. I'm thinking of the death of Argus especially. That was very sad for us. Remember Odysseus' dog? Yeah. They do it in heavy on pathos.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So then, I know it's like first started with like that kind of book about more so like some classical or Greek mythology or something like that. So then after reading it, were you immediately like, oh, like did you know about the classics and were immediately kind of interested in then after that, or was it? I know, I guess what I'm trying to ask is from like I knew like what Greek mythology was, but then I didn't really know like what the classics was. Was that the same for you?
Oh, for sure. No, there's no way I knew that there was a field. Yeah. I just thought there were cool super heroic characters or supernatural characters. I don't think even when I went and started studying Latin, I was aware that there was something called classics. That must have formed sometime in the middle of high school in some epiphany. But even the fact that we had a department called the classics department, I bet didn't really make its way through my brain until I was at least 13 or 14 years old.
Came to Roxbury Latin, started studying Latin. Was that kind of love for mythology then emboldened in a way, or was it supported? Or
No, I mean, we didn't learn the same things that you did. It was really drilling for at least 3 years. I don't think that I don't think that the study of the content itself inspired any intellectual investment. And that's not to throw shade on the people who are teaching it. My point is that, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, it was the people who were teaching me that kept me doing it.
Yeah.
And what we were studying was a secondary priority. But it was the characters or the caricatures of people in that particular department that I found so compelling and so funny that I wanted to spend more time with them. And it happened to be the case that they were teaching Latin and they were teaching Greek.
Yeah. No, I've talked with many of either my classmates or some of even other teachers and how they kind of got into classics, and they said a lot of it was either because they just had like a really good teacher or professor and want to kind of take all of their classes just because they love that. And I think that's like definitely a big part of how the classics kind of attracts students, is I think it attracts like for like an interesting like kind of batch of like teachers, and then which makes for an even interesting or more so interesting like kind of study. Definitely. Yeah.
It's a self-selective bunch of weirdos for sure. But the idea of being attracted to a particular teaching style is, I would argue, not unique to classics itself.
Oh, yeah.
You'll see a lot of that in college, hopefully,
Yeah.
that you'll want to take a course with a particular person and they happen to be teaching a particular topic.
Yeah, no, that's true. So then you still kind of following your kind of classical journey. So you took Latin for 3 years and then switched to Greek.
Yeah, I got out of there.
You got out. Okay. So what was that decision then to go from Latin and stop Latin and then go to Greek?
It's very hard to go back to the mind of a 16-year-old me. I'm sure there was very little intention behind it, except that I don't think I disliked Latin. And you know what I remember? I remember trying to pitch doing 3 languages, and they shut that down real fast. So because we only had French, that was our only modern language at the time, no Espanol yet. So I pitched French and Latin and Greek, and they said no bueno. And so I cut Latin so I could keep one modern language and then take on an ancient one. And I think the reason that I dropped Latin in favor of Greek is in part just variety and wanting something new. And I think deep down, I think I knew that it would make me feel special to have some sort of secret code that only I and a very small group of students could understand. It's bizarre. I mean, it's just it's not an alphabet that comes naturally to us.
Very much so. Incredibly daunting to look at right now.
You'll be fine. After week 1, you'll be fine.
Yeah. But it's I definitely would say I'm excited for. I think we have a couple other students, no more than 5, I think.
That's a bumper crop.
Yeah.
We're in a rebuilding year.
I know. So I heard it sways from certain years, but I've heard even some years it's only been 1 student who will take Greek.
Good God.
I know.
Well, I think it goes in waves, and we happen to be coming out of a trough. But that means we're on our way to a crest.
That's
very,
good.
very good news.
No, yeah. But no, I'm excited because it does kind of foster, I saw like an enclave of like Greek students, and
you're delicately avoiding the word cult. Yeah. There's a book on that called The Secret History by Donna Tartt, of this very small group of classical studies students in college. And there's murder. You would enjoy it. I think you'd really like it.
I'll have to look. What is it again?
The Secret History.
Secret History. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but definitely, because I think that even as anytime I tell someone about like, I can't really say like the classics and expect someone to know that, because like especially for me, when I had heard like the classics at first, I thought that they mean like, oh, like does it mean like the books that you would consider like classics. I think when I was really young, I thought it was like
Charles Dickens and Jane
exactly.
Austen. Yeah, that's fair.
And then even now, say like to someone that asked me, "Oh, you're studying like Latin?" I said, "Oh yeah, it's like my school's like a classical school." I can never really say that. I have to say like, "Oh, it's a Latin school or something like that," and people kind of, it registers a little bit more with them.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
but no, definitely a very like niche and interesting study, which then brings me to the question of, do you think that the classics can still apply to the modern world? And then, if so, how? Have you observed it applying, or so forth?
It depends what aspect of the classics you're talking about. There's a whole field that you mentioned, Mr. Muchnick, name check. He's in the subfield of classical reception, so a study devoted entirely to the analysis of the ways in which classics have been used in the relatively modern world. People are still co-opting Caesar or Cato or Cicero or Marcus Aurelius for their own ends. Or they are portraying ancient Rome or ancient Greece in a way that then gives them some sort of legitimacy as a continuation of those values as far as they portray them. Whether it's accurate or not is up to, I guess, the classicists. But yes, I'd be kind of a loser or a hypocrite if I said that if I was teaching classics and I felt that there was no relevance. I will say that I don't teach it because I feel like it's my duty to make it feel relevant. I think it's just cool, and I think you would get that response from a lot of the younger classics teachers, at least. I'm not capable of waxing poetic or eloquent on, the ancient values and how they connect to us today. But there's a degree to which I just am astounded at, almost in the sense of high fantasy. There's a fully developed world that you can continue to explore deeper and deeper and deeper, except it's real and it happened. And we've built cities on top of these places. And that is a very cool twist that makes something that may seem very far away and very abstract sort of startlingly real.
No, for sure. I was, I think off of your point about how I think one thing you said was like how we've built cities like on top of it stuck out to me. I was talking with, there's a professor at UPenn who I think it was Professor McInerney, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, I audited a class of his.
What?
Yeah, this was over spring break. I audited.
What?
Yeah, I forget the exact lesson plan, but it was essentially about how the structure of the Athenian military and how that might have influenced the founding of democracy. It was incredibly interesting in itself. But then
Aristotle writes about
yes,
that exact thing.
Exactly. He actually covered a bit of that too. But then it was in the lesson in general. It was just I never really thought about it in that way. Examining how did like democracy come up, and then that was an interesting theory to really delve into for like solid 2 hours. But he was then talking also about how he really likes to see, especially how America is so influenced by the classics, and especially he said through architecturally, and just our like society in general, politically as well. And he loves seeing like those kind of like connections and parallels, and that was something I guess I feel like even now I was walking by RL and I saw like we have some columns supporting the building, and just kind of looking at that, and then also seeing like thinking about columns in general, how like what an interesting kind of design and how it's carried through these like centuries and such. And then that was the biggest part for me, is seeing how the classic still influences us today. And I think it's subtly, but definitely still there.
This is going to sound very teacherly again, but I have a book for you. I'll lend it to you. It's on my shelf. It's called Are We Rome by Colin Murphy, and it is this exact topic of drawing as many parallels as you can, but also, taking a backseat and not getting too hot about the idea that we are Rome and we're destined for the same fate of Rome.
Yeah. No, that's true too. I would love to then read that.
Sure.
Yeah. And then so Similar to kind of that question is then, or I guess not similar to, but then also kind of following off of your study of the classics and continue with then like it through high school, and then also you studied some of, I understand, like Greek in college, correct?
Yeah, I kept up with Greek and I was a classics major in college.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. So then, what is through that classics, besides I guess teaching it now and also being a teacher, also in addition like allowed you to do?
Besides translating Greek, my immediate reaction was that during the pandemic, when we were all desperate to do things, one of the things that I took up was translating some Greek with a friend over Zoom once a week. Now, people did all sorts of weird things like bake bread, and that was just my own little flavor. But what has it allowed me to do? Well, you already crossed off teaching. I think, not to get too sentimental, that my exposure to classics and the things that I have been allowed to read have made me feel a little less alone, and also a little less special. And I think there's a good balance between those two things. On the one hand, you can feel like the tough times that you go through are completely unique to you. And when you find that people have written about these things 2,000, 2,500 years ago, that might make you feel a little bit less alone and have some sort of sympathetic connection with the classics. On the other hand, it also makes you feel a little less special, which is a good thing. I think there's a good degree of humbling that any student coming out of our school might need. And to realize that a lot of ideas have already been grappled with, and that maybe they have come to conclusions that will be more profound than anything you can yourself arrive at, is a useful exercise in intellectual humility.
Very much so. We're reading, we're not reading it, but in Latin class we'd kind of started to dabble in that. We were reading like Cicero's Ad Familiares about his daughter dying. And while I guess still also young enough, I don't have any children, but in the same way, hearing about, I guess not, had some sort of sympathy, and especially in the way that he like describes it, and hearing about his like kind of tragedy and how he talks about it, especially in the recognizing those similar kind of themes, and even like modern literature, especially. And then seeing how it's kind of persisted through, like those times, especially.
Right.
I would definitely say so.
I mean, Cicero was a particularly prolific writer. We have a lot of him, and he was very keen on making sure we had a lot of him to secure his future and his legacy. And his De Senectude, writing about old age and aging, and his De Amicitia, writing about friendship. Those are still in print, and I think people return to those. Just like they return, like what's the classic? Right at the top is Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. Every philosophy 101 student feels like he's suddenly found his spirit animal when he or she reads that. It's up there with Montaigne, and the reason that those resonate is because those feelings are eternal, right? That's part of the human condition. It's not like Romans just had ideas that were completely unique to their own experience.
No. I think at first too, especially reading those texts like in Latin is definitely also a very different feel, and you get to really kind of understand how eternal a lot of these these like issues or just general kind of happenings in your life are really timeless, and that it's not specific to you. In the same way you said, it's like not makes you feel special, but then
it's not about you, Aspen. It's a good lesson.
No, very much so. Then also provides you company is like a very good way to put it. And then moving on to another question is for someone like you who has studied classics, then majored in it, and you've already kind of done this and recommending some books and so forth, but then even further, what other classical texts or scholarships would you recommend to someone who's first starting, who's like a budding classicist of sorts, or just in general, something that you've really loved as a classicist.
Ooh, really loved. Well, I mean, you've got some stuff up here, right?
Yes.
I think a gateway is definitely Madeline Miller, both with Song of Achilles and Circe, which came after. Everyone's very excited on Classics Twitter, which does exist, because Emily Wilson is getting close to finishing, or maybe has finished her translation now of the Iliad, right?
Oh,
she already had the Odyssey come out in 2017 or so, and the Iliad is soon to be released. Although, honestly, I'm not on Twitter, so I can't confirm the actual dates of these things, but I'm told these things. So Emily Wilson's translations of Homer, I think, are a more accessible way into the epic tradition than what we do, which is Fagles, or what some other schools do, which is Lattimore. It feels a lot more modern. Something I'm reading right now, and by, I'm actually rereading because I gave up on it about 5 or 6 years ago, is called The Fate of Rome by Kyle Harper. And, everyone loves to speculate on why the empire finally fell. And obviously it's not going to be one single thing that led to its demise. And Kyle Harper takes a sort of natural and climactic angle, and so he looks at what he considers what he calls sort of the natural record, ice cores and tree rings, and studies what the climate would have been at that time and how it may have actually been hostile to an empire that was spread across so much of Western Europe and the Mediterranean, and the adding on plagues and droughts and geohazards. He just happens to look at it from that one angle. It doesn't mean it's the one thing that led to the end of it, but it's a cool one. Since I haven't come across that before. Something that really something that really lights my fire as a classical text. Maybe it's so lame to keep going back to Homer. There's Chapman's Homer. Every other person seems to have done a translation of Homer, at least in the Victorian era. And Chapman has this beautifully illustrated version with rhyming couplets, I think, and it's got to be in meter as well. Don't quote me on it. It's probably iambic pentameter, and it just feels so old, and it feels like it could be recited and sung, and I like that. Whereas Emily Wilson sounds like it's just a person sort of having a conversation with you. The Chapman one is, it goes hard on the classical approach, understanding that it was first recited as a song, right?
Well, of course, I guess that's what you would lose, and of course the translation is you go from actually in the meter and then having like that rhythmic like kind of pattern to it, and then you lose that.
I can't wait to see what you do in 15 years with your own translation.
We'll see. I would be interested already now as seeing the differences among my classmates, and just will be assigned like a translation for the Aeneid, especially, is quite hard. And then comparing like our translations, especially, you even see none of them are the same, all of them completely different, and still getting a lot of stuff wrong on them. But there's that's definitely become like a big portion of like thinking about the classics for me is like who's translating it, and then I think I heard the phrase like cui bono, like whose benefit, of course, and thinking about all these things that go into a translation has really interested me. So
it's hard.
Yeah,
I thought it was just getting the words.
And that's what for the longest time I was just like,
not.
Well, you just translate it, right?
Makes me feel really stupid.
I know. Well, there's so many things to have been different among them. You can take you even showed us the different translations of like the Odyssey, and then some
we did a few
incredibly different, to where you're like, oh, is this even the same story that they're talking about? But I'm very interested in the translation aspects. And so besides then offering what like other scholarships, classical scholarship, then what advice do you have for a young or like aspiring classicist like myself, or when even younger, someone maybe just a kid who's interested in mythology.
A kid who's just interested in mythology.
Yeah, just like he read like one little kind of the Dolores was book.
Dolaire's Book of Greek Myths.
Book
Oh, he's
Greek
started
myths.
to drink the Kool-Aid. Well, what's
Yes.
the agenda? Like, am I trying to get this person to go deeper?
Whatever you would think, whatever really helped you the most, and what you would think how someone else should kind of at least look a little bit further into the classics.
I think classics doesn't have to be a certain way, and I think that it is portrayed and justifiably portrayed as just this musty, dusty thing, and it is dying. People are cutting their Latin programs across the country. We have 5 students taking Greek. Right, it's not robust as it once was. Doesn't mean it doesn't have value, and I think that there are a lot of people coming up in, I sound so old, coming up in the new generation of classical scholarship who are trying to do new things that rescue it from its reputation that it has had as sort of this, I'm using musty, fusty, and dusty, all these sort of rhyming synonyms, and trying to extend it to other fields as well. I think there's a theory that if they can make it interdisciplinary, more interdisciplinary, that might be a way to appeal to a wider audience and also to sort of resurrect it or inject some fresh blood. So not just working through translation of ancient texts, but as I said, looking for Kyle Harper's example, looking at it through a climactic perspective. Or there's great work starting with Emily Wilson of how could a translation reflect the values and perspectives of the 21st century rather than Chapman's Homer from the 18th. Man, if it's not in the 18th century, I'm going to be so in trouble with the classics gods. I think there are good things that are happening right now that will make it feel more engaging and less just plugging into an ancient tradition where you memorize everything just so that you can seem interesting, or actually not even interesting, just kind of chatty at cocktail parties when you're in your 30s.
No, for sure. I would also say then the biggest thing for me with thinking about how the classics, would be like more relevant is, of course, I think in general for like the humanities. I think it was. I think it was Friedrich, like Nietzsche, like the German philosopher. We were talking about
Go
this
on.
in philosophy club like a week ago or something.
I forgot there's a philosophy club.
I know, yeah. It was recently started, but
Yes.
doing well so far.
Nascent.
And then so it was this one quote. I never really kind of actually thought it out, but he said that the humanities have kind of been used almost now as just as like testings or like to kind of as more of like a probing or like examination, when in reality the humanities should be a tool to help people essentially work on themselves or their life, or to learn from the humanities instead of just
Yeah, there's a dangerous way in which people can use maybe humanities more widely, but also classics specifically, as sort of a test of one's cultural literacy. And that gets very dark and very problematic quickly. It doesn't matter at the end of the day whether you know Julius Caesar or not, or whether you've read the Odyssey. But what you're getting at is the idea of what the knowledge of those things might then push you to when you reflect upon what you're doing on this planet and what your values are. Absolutely, that's a great rephrasing.
Yes, no, that was what I would think about. Like, I think was kind of what hooked me more so into the classics, and then I think that would be like an interesting angle, especially too for. I think might be how we get more classicists or something like that, how that might interest more like students. And then my last questions then is all right. So then just to kind of, we talked a lot about just the classics and kind of in general.
Sure.
But the classics course, very broad study. So
Oh God.
yes. I think we talked about this a little bit. So I think I maybe have like a guess, but what part of it specifically?
Oh, phew.
Yeah,
Okay.
what were you thinking?
I thought you were going to
ask?
say, what is classics? And I was
Oh,
like, here
to
we
you.
go.
Okay. No. But so, what part of it would you say you enjoy the most, or would you say you've come to focus your area of attention on? So
Homer. I
Homer?
mean, I
There
seem
you
to
go.
have brought it up more times than intended just in this conversation. Definitely into not only the language of Homer, which is so different from the Attic Greek that you're going to be learning next year. And it's frustrating to shift between those. But also the stories behind those. I mean, I think it would be hard to argue against the idea that the Iliad and the Odyssey are foundational texts in the Western canon.
Oh, for sure.
And so when you study those, you see how it echoes across everything else that you end up reading, and the archetypes of characters there, just repeated again and again. You're a Joseph Campbell guy, so this is not new to you.
Yeah.
I would definitely say that of all the things that I've looked at in Greek and in Latin, I think Homer's the one that I've returned to again and again.
So then, what about for I know you said of course then Homer. What do you think about then do you still I guess off of that, do you still know, can you translate Latin? You remember it back
I
to,
wonder that
ninth
every
grade?
day, Aspen. When someone comes into my office, I'm like, can I still even do this? The short answer is yes.
Okay.
And the long answer is yes, but not as well as I used to. Right. The issue was that I focused on Greek in college.
Yeah.
We go to a school that has Latin in its name, and by virtue of exposure to the students that I work with in different capacities, I've returned to Latin, and I would teach it again, and it probably will be the case that I'll teach it again in the coming years. But I would confidently say that a senior in Latin is far more capable than I am right now.
No, yeah, we have a definitely robust Latin system too, which of course I'm prepares us well. But no, but I'm definitely how I think exploring Homer, and then of course reading Hero, 1,000 Faces, and then even reading just the Odyssey this year. I'm really excited. I think I'll also be reading the Iliad next year.
Yeah, English or in Latin?
In English. So in Latin class.
It's in Latin class.
Yes.
It's bizarre.
I know. Essentially, I heard our part of the second semester just kind of turns into an English class essentially. Just but regarding the Iliad.
And they said it was a dying field.
No, but yeah. So I've definitely, I think just getting a little taste of it and reading the Odyssey this year was interesting. And then I guess off of that, because then you read the Odyssey in 9th grade.
Yep.
But
I'm still working off my copy in 9th grade.
So then you read it in 9th grade, of course, but then did you ever in Greek then actually translate part of it?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, in college.
So then was there a difference there that you had noticed immediately, in how you kind of interpreted the text, or just read it in general?
Well, just the depth, right? We're trying to race through 24 books in a couple months in 9th grade.
Right, yeah.
And we're not assuming that anyone has a classical background. I mean, who the heck is Poseidon? He's mentioned in the first book, and a lot of people are still playing catch-up by the time we get to the second book. I took a course called the Epic Tradition in freshman year of college, and that just crammed all sorts of epic texts, including Homer, down your throat. And then in actual Greek language courses, we did a book here and there. And during that weird fever dream of COVID, I translated book 24 with a friend of mine. And those opportunities as a pseudo adult and then real adult definitely felt like more profound interactions with the text. That the latter, right, that last one, translating it yourself, making decisions in what you were trying to convey, that was hard, and I didn't do well, but it was an exercise unlike anything I'd done before, and I would love to return to.
No, I can imagine. I'm excited to then see how that's the biggest thing for me now, I think, is even in my like study of like mythology, and like reading about like Paul and Daphne, or reading some of these stories in like the Metamorphoses, but then in English versus then we actually had to translate some of them this year.
Yep.
And then huge difference, and then how the myth and even some of the details now kind of like resonated with me. So I was just curious about that for how like that kind of affected you. But,
You've got the bug, Aspen.
No, very much so. Yeah. So I think that if there's anything else that, I don't know, questions you had or anything else.
You've exhausted my knowledge of classics.
I'm glad. That was my goal today. But again, yeah, then that was great. So yeah, that concludes the first episode of The Oldest Study with my guest, Mr. Beam. Thank you for being here. It was a real pleasure.
Glad to do it, Aspen. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
How are your ears?
My ears are good. It feels weird now to take them off. That was interesting. I
had you in my head.
I know, that was